David Coleman, talking at the leadership committee again at the University of Pittsburgh. Listen to this.
So with that in mind, I'm about to jump in, but I'm just going to say one word about my own organization, which is Student Achievement Partners. Student Achievement Partners, all you need to know about us are a couple of things. One is we're composed of that collection of unqualified people who were involved in developing the common standards.
We are that collection of unqualified people who were involved in writing the standards. There you go, right? You get what you pay for educationally. And this is good too. Go back to that one, the farce that standards, the standards are just standards. They're just these wonderfully benign, apolitical guideposts that teachers help teach to. Well, listen to what he says about that. Okay? Because the guy who did all this has a very different opinion about what your teachers are going to be free to do.
Which is teachers will teach towards the test. There is no force strong enough on this earth to prevent that. There's no amount of hand-waving. There's no amount of saying they teach to the standards, not the test. We don't do that here, whatever.
Isn't it great that this guy that nobody's ever heard of is bigger than the president, the pope, and the emperor? Because there's no force on this earth that's going to stop your teachers from teaching to our tests. Who controls your kids? It ain't the teachers. It ain't your state and local school boards. It's not the governor, right? Who controls your kids? It's certainly not you. Your kid, and the very same guy who did this is now rewriting the SATs, and not just the SATs, but all the advanced placement tests your kids have to take to get college credit in the public schools. He's rewriting all those exams too, which means the curriculum is going to have to change. And how the first one he did was history. We'll see that coming up. I'll show you that in a minute. The first exam he rewrote is the advanced placement history exam. It's a doozy. And all the textbooks have to change to conform to his view of American history. Would it surprise you to know that his view of American history is shockingly anti-American? And this one kind of gets me too. Remember all that stuff that there's no data mining going on here? Remember all the stuff that this is benign? Remember all the stuff that this is state-led, not federal-led? Remember all the stuff that President Obama had nothing to do with this? The Obama campaign, Arnie Duncan had nothing to do with this. This is a private entity. I want you to watch this short montage where he blows all of this out of the water. The clip I'm about to show you is from 2007, 2008. Right when he was working hand in glove, by his own admission, with the Obama people and how to do this. This whole thing was being set up. Listen to the short clip here.
For that, we're partnering with another side of the campaign, of the Obama campaign, that is, with Jeremy on mobilizing, the field mobilization, right? So there's data and there's field mobilization. But we're also talking about communications. We're talking about advocacy and policy. I want to introduce a topic, but as I introduce it, I want to talk about another man who used data to change the world, someone who I admire quite a bit. Because, again, as you think about your power and your force in this world, let's remember who really won the election. Is the person who led the Obama campaign's use of data to galvanize a generation of low-income people to vote like they had never had before. The simple precision and excellence of the use of information to achieve a result is something in my mind that deserves astonishment. It means, again, that there is no force greater. Think about it. Think about it. Hundreds of millions of dollars spent on this campaign. And what made the difference, right? But this incredible precision and insight gained from data, not only knowing where people are, but testing various interventions, seeing what works, keeping focused on delivering them. And that, of course, is Dan Wagner. And they might wonder whether we had a legion of talented lobbyists or friends in the right places. Tom, who knows me well, knows how pathetic the beginnings of the Common Core Standard movement were. Think of a napkin. Think of a few people in a room with an idea. Also talking about communications. We're talking about advocacy and policy. We met the other day on their invitation with the White House because they saw that we were beginning to take the lead on this issue, and they saw an opportunity for this country to get something done. That means we shall not rest until these inequities go away. We're partnering with Dan Wagner's team from the campaign on the data side we actually have the largest set of data, perhaps, on some counts. We are going to transform our data systems. They are designed not just to hold data, but to transform data into a force that propels kids forward. We're going to transform them such that they're not just what happened, but design what's the opportunity gap that we can see coming. What patterns can we see in our data so we can intervene earlier? The forces, for example, in Latino families holding their kids back. And I know it's controversial to describe parenting sometimes as not a force that propels kids forward, but actually holds them back. So we are going to work very hard over the next 5 to 10 years. And with that, I shall end. Thank you so much for your attention.
Parenting is a force that holds kids back rather than propel them forward. Before the first sentence of the first standard was written, he's talking about how data is the aggregate point here. Getting information on kids so you can manipulate kids. Get information on kids so you can intervene. Get information on kids to use data. Do you want your schools run the way they run political campaigns? All right, to use data to influence, to manipulate, to shape, to twist, to seize power? It is amazing what these people tell you. They tell you exactly what they did. They tell you exactly how they did it and why. They didn't lie about it. It's right out there in the open. That's what John Gruber's telling you, right? Nobody paid any attention to this. We were too caught up in hope and change. Right? We were too caught up in radical transformation. Right? Consequence of too much wealth and ease. Right? This notion that you can pull a pin, pull a plug, and suddenly everything that didn't work is going to work. And you understand the consequence why Mr. Marx said history it starts first as tragedy, right? Because by not teaching kids the genuine history of the country, not awakening in them a sense of just what it cost to get free and rich, right? That went away in a couple generations. What happened between 48, the generation that survived the Great Depression and won the war? What happened between 1930 and 1948? Then between 1948 and 1970, that changed all that. Failure, the second part of our talk today. And it's interesting that I got a quote up here from Bill Gates, because anymore I can't tell if Bill Gates is closer to Karl Marx or closer to the capitalist free market system that made him a billionaire, right? And you think about the irony of Bill Gates' own statement. Bill Gates said, "It's fine to celebrate success, but it is more important to heed the lessons of failure." Isn't that amazing? 50 years of this kind of educational reform. Increased federalization, increased centralization, increased expense and cost, much less local control, much more rigorous, meaningless, standardized tests. Been doing it for 50 years. 50 years of failure, Mr. Gates. You say you should heed the lessons of failure. You didn't do it. You didn't do it. It's fine to celebrate success, but it is more important to heed the lessons of failure. Let's talk about failure. Let's start with the Washington State Democrat Party. I want you to notice the date here, January of 2015. Took 6 years, but an entire Democrat state legislature in one of the most Democrat states in the Union, 6 months ago now, came out and unilaterally condemned Common Core. I'm going to talk about failure here. Because we all know, right, that unless criticism comes from the left, no one on the left's going to listen to it. Unless criticism comes from progressives, they're not going to listen to criticism. It's why we've had such a long road to hoe, right? So if you've been to my talks, you know. One of the only arguments you get for all the data that's put out there, all the information that we give, all the documentation that we provide, is just a bunch of right-wingers, right? Must be right-wingers, tea partiers, tea baggers, tinfoil hat wearers. That's the whole argument against anybody who raises an eye about Common Core. Okay, well, let's turn these folks into teabaggers, shall we? How about the entire Central Committee of the Washington State Democrat Party 6 months ago? The Central Committee of the Washington State Democrat Party passed a resolution roundly condemning the Common Core. The first time a statewide Democrat Party committee has taken a public position against the core, and it happened in the very backyard of Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation, which has provided the funding that made the National Standards Project possible. The Washington Democrats call it a National Standards Project, not a state-led project. And you think about what this means. You want to run for office in Washington State? That's on their party platform now. Washington State is a Democrat state through and through. There really aren't Republicans out there. Which means if you want Democrat money to run as a Democrat in the state of Washington, you have to accept the party plank. So please tell me what the state of Washington knows that all these Republican states with Republican governors don't know. What you're about to see, I'm going to read the whole resolution. It's a litany of the evils of Common Core, straight from Democrat voices. What do they know that your own state doesn't know? I shouldn't mention names, because you very well may be sitting in a state where we can't get anything like a resolution like this, even with Republicans in control of the legislature and the Senate, the Assembly, and the governor's mansion. Right? Here's what they say. What is it? Whereas the copyrighted and therefore unchangeable Common Core state standards, what are they? They're a set of controversial, top-down academic standards that were promulgated by wealthy private interests, not states and governors and teachers, that were promulgated by wealthy private interests without any research-based evidence or validity, never been tested, and which are developmentally inappropriate in the youngest grades. And whereas, as a means of avoiding the U.S. Constitution's 10th Amendment prohibition against federal meddling in state education policy, I gotta stop and call attention to the fact, what does it say about Common Core that it's forcing Democrats to cite the Constitution of the United States? That's kind of a big deal, isn't it? Whereas as a means of avoiding the U.S. Constitution's 10th Amendment prohibition against federal meddling in state education policy, who wrote it? 2 unaccountable private trade associations. The National Governors Association and this CCSSO, they received millions of dollars in funding from the Gates Foundation and others to create the core. And whereas the U.S. Department of Education improperly pressured state legislatures into adopting the core and the high-stakes tests based on them as a condition of competing for federal race-to-the-top stimulus funds that should have been based on need. And a quick word about that. You heard Bill Gates say it. Did you know when the outgoing Republican president George Bush in 2008 and the incoming Democrat Obama told you that unless you coughed up billions of your own taxpayer dollars to buy out banks and car companies, the whole economy would crash? Did you know, you heard Bill Gates say it, hundreds of millions, about $1.1 billion of the stimulus package went directly to the Department of Education. What were you bailing them out from? Do you honestly think the federal Department of Education was going to go bankrupt given the way the feds spend money on themselves? Why did your stimulus dollars go to the federal Department of Education to begin to create the tests even before the standards were written? You go ahead and call it state-led all you want, but no one's buying it. Gruber's right. The truth doesn't really change the needle here much for too many people. It's a problem. But they go on to say, right? The implementation of Common Core will cost local school districts hundreds of millions of dollars to pay for standardized computer-based tests, new technology, curricula, teacher training, at a time when Washington State is already insufficiently funding K-12 basic education. All of this without any proven benefit to students. And whereas some states have already withdrawn from Common Core. Therefore, be it resolved that we call upon the Washington State Legislature and the Superintendent of Public Instruction to withdraw from Common Core and keep K-12 education student-centered and accountable to the people of Washington State. That's Washington. And you know, right? We've got some folks from California here, so I'm exempting you from this statement. You know that Democrats in Washington State are really more like progressives, right? The Californians understand this. Who ruined Washington State to begin with, right? California. You see the problem here. What does it tell you? And where is that in Wisconsin, Governor Walker? Where is it in Ohio, Governor Kasich? Hey, Chris Christie, where is it in New Jersey? Hey, Governor Scott, where is it in Florida? And you know the theme that keeps coming up again and again and again, given that Republicans control the lion's share of state legislatures in this country, nothing from them. They're not on your team. Really? The Washington Democrats? 6 months ago. Everything they just told you, we've been saying for 5 years. Everybody's been warning you about. And then, okay, it's state-led, we get you. Then, if that's true, shouldn't states be able to walk away from it? But they can't, can they? Every time a state tries to distance itself from this monstrosity, the Fed comes in and bullies and threatens. Notice the date, April 2015. You saw what happened. One of the last great vestiges of American entrepreneurship, of American freedom rabble-rousing. Moms and dads opting their kids out of these tests all across the country. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands, whole classes of schools, whole districts refusing to take the tests, right? And again, if this is state-led, and every state in the union legally allows moms to opt out of tests, then what's your big beef if this is state-led? So what happens, though? As opt-out numbers grow, 2 months ago in April, as opt-out numbers grow, Arne Duncan says feds may have to step in. U.S. Education Secretary Arne Duncan said Tuesday that federal government is obligated to intervene if states fail to address the rising number of students who are boycotting the mandated annual exams. Well, who mandated them? States have no provision. You can opt out in every state, including Wisconsin. They're mandated by the feds. How do you say Common Core is state-led? That's a little wink to the states. Either you pass laws to force every one of your kids into those tests, or we will step in and do it for you. Mafia keeps coming up to me, right? Duncan's comments come as an opt-out advocacy group in New York, hardly a conservative state, reports that more than 184,000 students statewide out of 1.1 million eligible test takers refuse the exams, 15% of all New York students. He also said, Arne Duncan, that tests are, quote, just not a traumatic event, unquote, for his children who attend public schools in Virginia. Quote, it's just part of most kids' education growing up. Sometimes adults make a big deal that creates some trauma for the kids. So moms and dads who object to the tests, see, once again, you're traumatizing the kids. Isn't it funny with all this bullying curriculum in the schools that nobody ever stops to consider that perhaps the biggest bully we have in this country is the federal government? Right? You just ask people who've been audited for their Tea Party activities by the IRS about that. Has anybody been fired for that yet? I didn't think so. Right? I call this Big Brother Threatens, right? The city of Chicago, also not a so we got really liberal New York, we got really liberal Washington State, we got really, really liberal Chicago. What happened in Illinois? In Illinois, the city of Chicago refused to gave the test to only 10% of their population. 600 schools in Chicago. They're only testing 60. They refuse. They call the tests a complete waste of time. They talk about how these tests are too much federal government intrusion into state and local control. That's what Chicago says. The interesting thing is, every other school district throughout Illinois is 100% on board with Common Core. 99% of the state is giving these exams to their schools, except Chicago, who will only give them to 10% of their schools. For that, Arne Duncan and the federal... By the way, what authority does a Department of Education secretary have to threaten anything? Who is he? He's the president's cabinet. He's an appointment. What power under the Constitution, what power in the founding documents does Arne Duncan have to impose any penalties on anybody for anything? And yet here you have it, simply because Chicago, and remember Washington State, Barack Obama's, Bill Gates' own backyard? Well, this is in Barack Obama's backyard, right? The city of Chicago's doing this. So what happened? Notice the date, January of this year. Feds threatened to take away $1 billion in school funding from Illinois. Chicago Public Schools' decision to administer new Common Core tests to only about 10% of the city's 600 schools could cost the state over $1 billion in federal aid. In a recent letter to Illinois School Superintendent Christopher Koch, former Assistant U.S. Education Secretary Deborah Delisle made it clear that the state could lose as much as $1.17 billion in federal education funding next year if Chicago schools don't comply with Common Core testing requirements. Bullying, right? Intimidation, threats. This is federal. This is a federal takeover of education. And then there's this, right? The Washington State Democrats pointed this out to you. Whatever money your state got for taking Common Core through Race to the Top, it wasn't enough. California received easily $900 million from the federal government to take Common Core. And it's going to cost them about $1 billion a year just to administer the tests. So you get a one-time windfall of about $900 million. And you already, the first year you employ it, you're already in the red. Notice the date, January of this year. Districts seek reimbursement for Common Core test costs. The state of California could be liable for as much as $1 billion a year in costs if a group of school districts succeeds in winning reimbursement for expenses associated with the implementation of computer-based tests in the Common Core and other new state standards. 4 unified school districts, Santa Ana, Vallejo, Plumas, and Porterville, and the Plumas County Office of Education filed a claim to classify the new tests as state mandates. Well, don't they have to be? The schools didn't take Common Core, the state took it. Wisconsin, your state took it. Tony Evers, the DPI secretary, took it in conjunction with Governor Doyle. That was it. Took it. That means all the school districts had to use it. Immediately, they all transformed. Of course, the tests are state mandates, which means guess who's going to have to pay for that, California? I hate to break it to you, your taxes are going up, right? They're going to have to. Where are you going to get this money from? And you don't think it's going to be the same thing here? Who's going to pay for all of this? There are a lot of rural school districts in Wisconsin that don't have the bandwidth capacity to be able to do this on a consistent basis. Where's the money going to come from? The feds aren't going to keep pumping it into your state. Right? If the Commission of State Mandates agrees, the state will be required to reimburse all districts statewide to recover costs. The only option those schools have, by the way, if the state doesn't admit to do it, is they go bankrupt, they go out of business. Those are your two choices, close schools or the state's going to have to pay for them. There's no other choice. Right? And that's what the feds have done to you. Now that you bought all the textbooks, Wisconsin, now that you put them in all your schools, school superintendents, now school boards, now that you adopted all of this and won't dare walk away from it because you're so afraid of what Tony Evers might say to you, now you're going to have to live with the consequences, right? Now you either shutter the schools or the state's going to have to cough up that money.